You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. It's not just your imagination. Matcha is actually getting harder to track down these days. The green drink has become a hot commodity in the past few years, blowing up on TikTok and taking up more real estate on your favorite coffee shop's menu. Japan's tea industry has struggled to keep pace with the fervor. There have been reports of a global shortage and price hikes. We wanted to see if and how this is affecting us in Seattle, so we sent our producer Maliha Syed to Miro Tea in Ballard to ask how they're experiencing the shortage.
Okay, so Jeannie did mention that there is a coconut matcha on the menu.
Yeah.
What's it called?
That would be the coconut matcha KUOW. That's one of our seasonal drinks. So we make the matcha for that with coconut water, and then on top we do a little coconut foam, which is made with condensed coconut milk.
Okay, I'm interested. Let's go for that one. Thank you so much.
There, she spoke with Jeannie Liu. Jeannie has been serving up all types of drinks, including matcha, since she opened Miro Tea in 2007.
Back then, there was nobody really carrying matcha in the Seattle area, at least that I knew of. Aside from, Starbucks was doing matcha lattes, their own version of matcha lattes. Definitely, it was like for the unique tea drinker who knew about matcha and understood what it was and where it was from, and they would order it. But it was really in the last, I would say, 2 years where it's just like now matcha is number one every single day on that beverage list.
Despite the craze, she says she's not too concerned about sourcing the tea. That's because she's been using the same supplier since she began.
And so in Japanese businesses, they prioritize business relationships. And the longer and the more steady that relationship is, they will put you higher up, in that priority list and getting access to their products. And so the farmers and the producers for our matcha, we've been working with since the beginning. And so even with the struggle of the shortage of matcha that's going on out there, we are still being able to obtain a certain quantity. Not as much as we normally would, I'll be honest. Normally I'm getting a third less than I should be getting, but because of that relationship, it's still plenty. I'm still getting plenty.
Jeannie is, however, expecting some changes soon. She says a new crop of matcha will be coming out in September, and that's when we'll really feel the impact.
My matcha will be going up in price. The cost of the matcha on my part is going to go up 250%. Longer term, I think that the cost increases are going to basically, unfortunately, filter out a lot of people from being able to purchase matcha. And so there might be a reduction or leveling out of matcha consumption, which then would probably, hopefully, level out the price increases. But if it continues to grow, then the prices will continue to grow until we reach a point where it's not sustainable anymore.
For now, we'll take as much a pleasure as we can while we can. And by we, I mean our producer, Maliha.
Thank you so much. Looks gorgeous. I got the coconut matcha cloud, and it's hitting the spot.
Thanks to Jeannie Liu, owner of Miro Tea in Ballard, for speaking with and caffeinating us. We also wanted to know more about what the shortage looks like on a wider scale. Bettina Makalintal is a senior reporter at Eater, and she's covered the matcha mania. Bettina, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what led you to report this story in the first place?
Yeah, so sort of selfishly, I am a matcha drinker myself and started noticing last year that it was getting a little difficult to find certain kinds of matcha that I enjoyed drinking. And so I was seeing that other people, especially on TikTok, were sharing that they were having similar issues. And this was starting, towards the end of last year. We were really seeing some outages and sort of some supply chain problems. And it seemed like maybe that could sort of improve as we came into this new year. But it seems like the shortage and supply and demand issues have really continued into this summer.
Can you describe why you love matcha, from a taste perspective, and what makes it different and preferable for you when you're at a tea shop?
Yeah, I think for me, it was mostly the desire to drink less coffee. And I've heard that sort of the way the caffeine exists in matcha, I've heard some people say that it was a little bit more, played a little bit better with their anxiety and stuff. And so that made me want to try matcha as a sort of daily drink. And I came to really appreciate the ritual of making it with the wooden whisk and everything. And I've just found that I really appreciate that flavor of the sort of vegetal, herbal side of it.
Yeah, so you actually do the whisk and everything at home. You're not just purchasing it fully made at a shop.
I do. Yeah, I think that it's kind of nice. It's a bit more of a process, but I think it's a nice opportunity to sort of slow down in the morning.
That is sort of why I started grinding my own coffee beans. I felt like that ritual really kind of adds to the whole process, so I can vibe with that, even if I'm not personally much of a matcha drinker. So, what is behind this shortage, Bettina? What's going on?
Yeah, so I think the really unavoidable part of it has been social media. And I think that we've really seen matcha become like the star of the specialty drinks culture right now. So we're seeing like a huge amount of interest both at cafes and at home as people are sort of trying to like bring these fancy little matcha drinks into their daily lives. So, so I think that like we're seeing this like huge demand for matcha in a really unprecedented way around the world. And we're also seeing matcha take hold in desserts like matcha tiramisu. So really, it's like people everywhere suddenly like really want matcha everything. The downside is that like matcha is harvested once a year and it's milled pretty slowly. And, I think a lot of the matcha producers in Japan have not sort of been prepared for this level of demand in the past because this feels very unprecedented on the global scale. So, like as a result, the like global demand for matcha is like really outpacing the supply, and it just seems to be continuing as like every day I hear sort of about a new matcha cafe opening, and so we're really seeing that like people want more and more matcha.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like this consumption pattern in Japan that was often based around ceremonial purposes, like a tea ceremony, is now the TikTok craze around the world, and these farmers are going like, yeah, we didn't have the supply chain ready for this. Have you noticed any major changes in the matcha landscape since you reported the story last year?
I think the major thing is just that, it did seem like these outages were going to sort of get better. There's a certain supplier called Ippudo that I was keeping an eye on their supply, for example, just to restock my own matcha at home. And, every day the sort of projected restock date keeps getting pushed back. And so, so I think that's been the biggest thing where I think everyone's sort of, there's a lot of uncertainty in the landscape still, where suppliers think that they can have matcha by this certain time. And, even that sort of is getting pushed back for various factors. And I think another thing that is worth touching on is like, especially because of social media, we've been seeing like, like you mentioned that matcha used to be part of these tea ceremonies, but we're very much seeing this shift where it's this like everyday drink. Like I mentioned, I'm making one every morning, for example, and there's people who are making multiple matcha drinks a day. So really that like sort of consumer behavior seems to be changing. And we've also been seeing some like, social media fueled overconsumption where people are hoarding mass amounts of matcha, like maybe more than, we might even recommend that someone have at home because it oxidizes and it's not going to be as good as when you bought it. So we are seeing like, some rampant shopping habits as well.
Shades of the toilet paper and COVID. But boy, that stuff going bad, like what a waste. So, Bettina, what about the supply side? Are there any pushes to either source this elsewhere besides Japan or push some sort of increase in production somehow?
Yeah, so I've seen one U.S. based tea company that sources from Japan, Kettle, just posted a blog post about how they are looking to like emerging matcha regions in Japan, because right now like like Uji is a major matcha producing region, and with that sort of like hitting capacity, it looks like they are sort of looking elsewhere to see where where else they can source matcha from. The downside, of course, is that like people want matcha immediately, right? But all of this like building up of supply chain and growing new crops, all of that takes a little bit more time than I think people are used to in our sort of everything on demand world.
What impacts should consumers expect going forward? I mean, just paying more for the matcha, like what we heard from Jeannie Liu earlier in our segment here? Or, I mean, are you expecting there to just be the occasional shortage with matcha?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think for consumers, it's primarily this level of it might be more challenging to buy high quality matcha right now, especially if you're, eyeing a particular brand. You might have to do a lot more like, reloading of their website, trying several times to get stuff. We're also seeing that there are some sellers who are limiting how much matcha people can buy. So Ippudo, for example, has capped purchases at 110 grams per day or 400 grams per month. So we're seeing that like even when you're able to get it, you're not necessarily going to be able to hoard in the same way. I think another thing to be aware of is, there was one matcha supplier who called out unauthorized resellers on their website. And so, I think we have also seen the rise of these like unscrupulous resellers who are just trying to sort of like take advantage of the boom cycle and charge people more. So I think the big takeaway is really for consumers to just like to be a little bit patient and to understand that like this is tea that needs to get grown and dried and milled. And even if we want to drink 3 fun little matcha drinks a day, we might not be able to. And we should, maybe sometimes we just have to make do with the one.
Do you think that it's an ethical issue, like overconsumption of matcha right now? I know there's a lot of other overconsumption things that especially Americans do. But do you find that there is sort of an ethical quandary there?
I do. I mean, I think it's a little bit, it does sort of, I find it a little off-putting to see people sort of hoarding to a level where it's like, you're not going to reasonably drink this in 6 months or even a year. And so just that sense of like needing to be so stockpiled, especially sometimes when it seems like people are very early on their matcha journey and they don't quite know what they like. They don't know if they even like making matcha every day. That sort of level of like performative matcha consumption feels a little bit unnecessary to me.
Yeah, this is why we can't have nice things, is the vibe.
Exactly.
Bettina Makalintal is a senior reporter at Eater. Her story on the matcha shortage first published last November. Thank you so much for this, Bettina. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.